So, welcome to today's podcast. Thanks for joining me as always. So, today's topic is probably one that maybe doesn't strike you as one that you may be thinking about all the time. And, you might be there sitting as a successful business owner or, built a great profession in whatever profession you might be in. And you've built up wealth and you're seeing success in areas of your financial life. You're building towards something, right? And that might be retirement, whatever it is, selling your business and something valuable for you and your family. The surprising part is a lot of people don't think about what it looks like at the end. It's what they're building along the way that matters for sure. But we also recognize that we all have an end to our lives. And so oftentimes people are not thinking about what's it look like for whoever's left in our lives and our families who would benefit from any wealth that we're building. And so today's topic is centered around a topic that some people may not understand or really truly appreciate is around trust. And this it connects with estate planning. And you may think that trusts are only for very wealthy families, or you hear these concepts of trust fund babies or such, and they're only for people who have significant amounts of wealth or something when you would set up when you're really really old, right? Why would I do it when I was young? And it's all this legal mumbo jumbo that we may not really understand and know why it makes any sense. And what I often believe too is for a lot of people, it's not something you want to think about because it involves dying and leaving this earth. But it's a fact of the matter is that we're all going to at some point. It's whether we plan for it appropriately to support the things that matter to us. And so trust isn't really about a legal document per se, but it's helping to decide ahead of time how you want your wealth to sort of be used and protected and perpetuated well beyond the years you're here. And so it's about making intentional decisions today for your family, for things that you care about. So the decisions they have to make in the future become less difficult, right? It's one of those areas that I think is unfortunately today not spent. There's not much time spent on it. So today's conversation is not about legal documents, which I'm sure no one really wants to sort of go deep into yet anyway. But it's about the structure of your life and supporting everything you built. And as a disclaimer, everything I share with you is not legal advice or tax or financial advice. It's just to help you bring awareness to things that you might want to consider as you're planning your own trust and estate planning sort of structure to support everything you're building and everything that occurs after you leave this earth. And so I'm not going to go through the details of every trust and such. That's for your advisor to talk to your estate planner and such to raise. But this is to help you think through, have you structured things in the way that you want so that things will happen in the way you want when you leave this earth. So really certainly encourage you to take this to heart and sort of see where it might fit for you as you move forward. Where do we start here? Well, like I said, trust isn't really a legal document. It's just a structure, legal arrangement that you set up, and it can impact a lot of things in your life, right? You may not think about it in all cases, but it can touch on your investments, the homes you own, your businesses, right? Retirement accounts. They're all going to potentially affect your charitable goals and certainly your children, if you have any, and the impact they could have on them in the future. And who knows, even further down the road, it could impact multiple generations in your life. So it can have pretty far reaching impact if planned and thought through, but it does require thinking through kind of what it is that you're trying to accomplish. And the purpose around that is associated with who receives your asset if you're no longer here, right? And when do they get them, right? And how can they use them and who controls them, right? These are all sort of questions that can be sort of focused in a trust document and designed in that way. But it requires someone to really think deeply about that. Oftentimes, I come across folks who hadn't even thought about a trust or even thinking about it and what will happen after they were no longer here. They just assume people would just figure it out, right? Their spouse or their children, that they would pick up the pieces and they'd be able to deal with it, which may be true. But for folks who are thinking about this ahead of time, wouldn't you rather have it set up so that they won't have to deal with some of those difficult decisions of selling assets or how to use the money that's already allocated to them. Right? They now have to make some of the difficult decisions. You can plan ahead and make sure that the things you want to have happen for them are set up before you leave this earth. And so it doesn't matter whether you have a little bit of assets or a big $15 million business. It's still going to still go through that same process of figuring out what happens after, and depending on the nature of your plan, it may not fulfill all the things you would hope that would happen when you left. And so some of the basic concepts around this that I want to share. Again, not going to go deep into it, but when we think about trust, there are two kind of general areas. One being irrevocable, right? That means you can't change it. It's pretty set in stone, which is serious things that you would have to go into if you did that because it's hard to reverse those things. And there's ones that are revocable, right? And when you think about revocable, a lot of people have heard of this concept of revocable living trust. And it really is just preparing your assets before you pass so they can transfer much easier to the next generation. So you're just kind of planning that out before, right? Versus irrevocable, where you lose a little bit of control. It maybe provides a lot more asset protection and tax protection for your family, but you give some control. So those are the things you need to kind of think through and talk through with your estate attorney and your financial advisors and such to help you think through those things to say, what is it you're trying to truly accomplish with all these sort of structures? And then they can help design how to position them in a way that kind of meets your needs with it. Because a lot of these things are designed in a way that they're going to be trade-offs, right? If you want ultimate control, then you're going to give up maybe some asset protection, right? And so maybe some tax benefits. So those are things that you want to consider as you're thinking through it. But bottom line is getting clarity around what it is that you truly would want to accomplish if something happens to you and you left this earth, got disabled, died, all those sorts of things. How would you want things to play out? Who would you want to control it? And how would you want others that you care about to access and benefit from your wealth? So, as it relates to trust, I think one of the biggest myths out there is that it's only for very wealthy people. They're the only families who could benefit from it. They have all the advantages and the money to be able to do anything they want. And so, those are the only people that really would benefit from things like this because they have the wealth to protect or pass. Well, for a lot of people who are building wealth and growing, you may not have reached where you want to get to yet, but there could be a case that as you're growing and continue to build through your profession or job or business, that you're actually going to grow into those things. So the ideal situation is to get ahead of that and set up the structures that you're growing into, even if you don't have it today. But for people who don't have all the wealth, there's still an important aspect of these things to consider because, as we talked about earlier in this discussion, this conversation, you eventually will pass. The question is, what do you want to leave uh, uh, to your heirs, and how do you want that structured? Even if it's to you feels like a lot less money, right? It isn't always just about taxes and such, but it's transitioning and making it an easy transition to the next generation, so that as they're mourning you, if you've left this earth, they're the recipients of the care that you put into the plan so that they know how to access this wealth very easily without a lot of hiccups. And so, even if it isn't in your mind a lot of money, it just makes it smoother as a transition happens later in life with less friction, less costs to do it. So, it's just getting ahead of it and planning for it. So, it's often I come across folks with even a trust in place, it's not actually lined up to the life they actually lead today or where they're going. Oftentimes, people get things set up, whether it's a will or trust and their estate plan together, it's potentially years and years ago, and it's often overlooked, right? They haven't kept up with it as they have grown in their assets or in their lives. Their business could have grown dramatically. Their assets are growing. They got children in place, right? They have new sort of pieces of real estate, whatever the situation, that their worlds have grown, gotten more complicated, but their estate plan actually hasn't followed suit. They've been left behind and not really been updated. So it's not that most people think that getting an estate plan or trust in place and they can set it and forget it. The reality is, as people evolve, grow, even their philosophies in life will change with it. And that's where these sorts of documents or arrangements, legal arrangements, really also need to be looked at because then it can align with what really truly matters as people evolve and grow in their lives, and their assets in their financial world also grows in complexity. I often see it where people have maybe graduated from medical school and they're getting going, and so they get these things in place, and then 20 plus years later, life looks dramatically different, but they've never looked at it again. And so it just needs to always. That's why it's always good to have the advisors around you to remind you of evaluating. Has anything changed? What's happening? What in your life has changed around what matters to you? Then these are sorts of structures that can be sort of mended and updated so they can align to where you want it to go and support the things that matter to you as you pass wealth on to the next generation. So, as I leave you with that question, one of the other areas of disconnect we often see is the the estate plan and tax situation in your world tend to operate separate from each other, right? When we think about trust, when we think about in the future as we're building our assets and such, we want to make sure that we're properly designing these things for future for anyone who's remaining in our worlds that we want to help benefit, which is also a huge component and is unavoidable in most of our lives is the world of taxes and tax planning. And oftentimes, a lot of these things are being done independent from each other and even independent from other things like investments and your insurance, et cetera. But when you kind of talk about estate planning and taxes, they are typically going to go hand in hand. Now, you may often say, well, it might only for very, very wealthy people, but there's a lot of areas that at a state level, you can have inheritance taxes and things that are going to impact things. So it's important to start thinking about it's not just transferring wealth, but doing it in a way that can be the most tax efficient for anyone who's going to be beneficiaries of any money that's being transferred over. And that could be related to your business, could be the investments that you currently own and enjoy, or any other insurances that you may have, like life insurance. Like, how do those fit into your equation as a transfer? And then how do we set up the structures in a way to be most tax efficient as they transfer into the next generation? So these are all important areas that often are treated separate, never really talked about. And that's why it's so key to get your other advisors to talk collaboratively about these things together with you so you can have a more comprehensive plan to account for making sure the money is going and transferring as fast and efficiently as possible, but hopefully maintaining as much of it so that the people who get the benefit from it get the most out of it and access to the resources in as easy a manner as possible and are able to keep as much of it as possible. So why don't these types of conversations happen? A lot of these professionals in their own sort of expert areas are doing great work. They're supporting their clients well. They continue to grow and provide value to their clients. However, they're very siloed in nature and how they operate. The estate plan will stay on the estate planning side of things. The CPA is focused on doing tax returns. The investment guy or girl is only focused on your portfolio, right? And your insurance person is maybe only focus on the protections in place to support you. But rarely is there a situation when anyone's helping you to coordinate and architect that broadly to make sure they are connecting the dots between them. Because as we know, a lot of them are very much connected. Think about the concept of taxes, right? They hit virtually every area of your life, but who's helping you to design and coordinate them broadly so they're functioning better together as opposed to independent pieces of your world that may have different priorities and different sort of advantages to them, but they're not really fitting together into a really cohesive piece that ultimately provides you maximum wealth, protection, and control over it over long periods of time and helps position the wealth to help support the things that matter to you in the next generations as money is passed. So to simplify this even further to something you're probably very familiar with is like building a home. You wouldn't have a independent contractors with their electrical or HVAC or plumbers all working independently, right? You need someone to coordinate that and sort of have a blueprint of how this thing's going to be built and all the components working in conjunction with one another. And that's why you need someone to help architect the entire blueprint to help you ensure that they're all functioning together and maximizing everything you're doing in your life. So we talked about the importance of this for any family for that matter, but this is the topic of estate planning and trust really particularly important as it relates to business owners, because obviously for business owners, a lot more to consider. If someone's just working a job, and things transfer, there's probably less friction in dealing with that. But as a business owner, you have other things you have to consider. The business succession, will that continue on? How will that continue on after you're gone, right? Who's going to maintain this going forward? Are there partners involved? There's ideas around buy sell agreements, like who's going to take over that business and where the funds come from, right? It could be around family transitions. Had that been planned out at all? So these are all areas of importance to consider, because you don't want to find out and deal with them after the fact, which could imagine be very, very messy if not thought through and planned for, or basically a lot of these businesses would just kind of fold, right? And there'll be no sort of benefit value from them going forward. So this is particularly important for business owners to start thinking about, because they recognize, for the sake of your business, the value of all that, all the employees that may be involved with it, families that are thinking about maybe taking charge after. These are all areas that's why it's so key to start thinking about these things sooner than later, because you want to likely be 10, 15 years ahead of this, and not be a minute late, because that could lead to very disastrous sort of impact to the value of your business, and then the obviously the impact to those that you care about who are going to deal with the aftermath. So key for business owners. There's just more for you to consider. And that's why it's so important to get ahead of this and start planning. It's given you quite a lot to consider and think through. But the reality is, trusts are not about dying. It's about how your wealth is going to benefit and transfer to the next generation in the way that you want. So if today's conversation brought to light that you may have gaps in your estate plan, tax planning, or investments, or other areas of your financial life, and you want help to explore them further, I would encourage you to reach out to me at perennialpride.com. I'd love to have a conversation, help you explore that, and help you identify how you can move forward. So thanks for joining me as always, and we'll see you on the next episode of the Perennial Pride Podcast. Thanks for joining me on this episode today. I really am grateful for you as listeners to the Perennial Pride Podcast. I hope you're getting some tremendous value out of it, and hopefully pushing you along your journey to financial freedom. I put this podcast together really to help you get more educated around your finances, so that you feel empowered to live the life that you really want. And if you like the content that you heard today or watched, then I would encourage you to go to my website, perennialpride.com. There's tons of other content there. And you can access my book, Wealth Beyond the Numbers. You can buy it there on my website. It's a aggregation of a lot of great tips and tools I've learned to not only build my wealth in my accounts, but build wealth in my life, and abundance and joy, and something that has a lot of my experiences in the journey that I've been on personally. Hopefully that can be also of value to you as you sort of move forward. So thanks again for being a Perennial Pride listener, and we'll see you on the next episode.